It's the second Sunday of Lent, and I'm back in the church. Yes, I know it's kind of hazy around me, but I kind of like it because there's that haze of this season of penance that will clear when we celebrate Easter. There's the haze of life in this world that will clear when we see God face to face. And you know, our first readings for the season of Lent always have something to do with our understanding of salvation history. And remember last week we had Moses instructing the Israelites before they entered into the Promised Land, and he was talking about how they are to worship God. Well, this week we actually rewind a really long time prior to that, when Abraham enters into this covenant of promise with God the Father. So it's kind of an odd reading, but the point of it really is this is the moment where they enter into this covenantal relationship, and God promises many descendants to Abraham and the land of Canaan, what we understand today as the Holy Land. So there's the promise, and God binds himself to fulfilling that promise to Abraham in this moment. So you know, what's really fascinating, though, is Abraham himself, he eventually, travels to Canaan, but he ends up there almost as a stranger. He doesn't really possess the land in the fullness of the promise that God makes. And neither does Isaac, his son, or Jacob, his grandson, his great-grandsons, neither. The 12 sons of Israel, they live there, they might even own some land. It's divided among them, but they don't possess it in the fullness of the promise either. It's not until hundreds of years later, after Jacob and his sons go down to Egypt and end up slaves to Pharaoh, and then again when God through Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt through the waters of the Red Sea and to the promised land, the land that was promised to Abraham. Finally, when they go there and they do as God instructs them to drive from the land, pagan practices and peoples and take possession of it as God instructs, it's really not until then that the promise is completely fulfilled. And so you get all of those connections, and you find out a little bit more of why this season is so important to us, but also what went into it. And for us, it's again an instructive background underneath, type that's leading to the reality of the Passover that we celebrate with Jesus, and our own coming out of Egypt in our hearts, mostly the slaveries that we experience, but ultimately for what? For the fulfillment of the promise that God makes to us, that God had made to Abraham and down through the line, God's fidelity to Jesus. But we become the fulfillment of the promise when we take possession of the land. Two ways. One, ultimately in the fullness of eternal life when we enter the promised land of heaven. But also this season is largely about recovering and taking possession of the land of our hearts, the homeland within us, wherein we drive from us, the things that, the practices that prevent us from knowing the fullness of God's promise in us. So a lot of background, goes pretty deep, goes pretty particular, but let those connections from the Old Testament open up something new in you, that you are heirs to the promise, and you have control over the destiny of your own heart, and driving from it the practices in this season that keep you from the fullness of the promise and complete union with God.